Okay, I think we'll start. I think we've got the majority of people now. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me this morning. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. This webinar is designed specifically for procurement staff. I know that there's quite a lot of techies on with us, which is great, and you're very welcome. But just please bear in mind that this is designed for procurement and not for techies specifically. And if you were on the webinar with us last week, you'll have probably heard all of this already. It's not going to go into lots of detail about everything in the standard. We are just going to focus on the aspects that are important to procurement so that as a procurement person you understand what in the standard has changed as part of issue 9 that impacts you and therefore the things that you need to focus on and what you need to do about it. So the video itself that we're going to play for you is only 10 minutes long because we're just focusing on supplier management and product defence in the upstream supply chain. As the video's playing, you're very welcome to ask questions. If you look at the top of your screen, you should be able to see a little Q&A tab. So if you just pop any of your questions into there, we can coordinate them during the webinar and then we'll answer them after the video. Or feel free to wait until we've finished the video and pop them in the Q&A after that. So I think with that being said, I shall just switch myself off and pop the video on. Welcome to an overview of the changes in issue 9 for procurement. This webinar is designed for those in procurement who want an overview of the changes in BRCGS Food Safety from issue 8 to issue 9. Full transparency before we start. We are not affiliated to BRCGS in any way, and we are not a BRCGS approved training provider. This is because we've chosen not to be, as we don't want to have to stick to the curriculum provided by BRCGS, as we believe that this prevents the training from being actionable. We're also not going to be able to go through every change in the standard during this webinar, as that would take too long. What we will do is highlight to you the key points of the standard that you need to focus on ready for your next audit. To enable this, we've gone through the standard and the interpretation guide for both issue 8 and issue 9 and compared them line by line. We've not used the BRCGS Key Changes document for this, as we know that this doesn't call out all the important changes to the level of detail that we would need. This webinar will explain some of the outputs of that piece of work. We won't be showing you extracts from the standard, as BRCGS wouldn't allow us to do this for copyright reasons. And you'll probably know by now that we like to do things our way, as we like to make it simple and easy to understand. Okay, with that being said, let's crack on. Key dates. The new standard was published on the 1st of August and will be audited from the 1st of February 2023. Therefore, if you have your audit on or from the 1st of February, you'll be audited to issue 9. The changes. BRCGS have called out a number of changes within the standard, but not all of them will impact you in procurement. But there's one critical change to the standard that will, and that's culture, so let's look at that in detail. Culture. Culture was introduced into the BRCGS standard in issue 8, and the requirements to it have been strengthened for issue 9. As a member of the procurement team, it's possible that you've not heard of culture before, so let's just go over some background before we get into the detail of the changes. What is culture? This is a huge topic, but very simply put, culture is a set of beliefs, attitudes and expectations. When applied to a business, it's like the personality that the business chooses to have. What's important to the business, what it wants to achieve, and the impacts that it wants to have. Defining the culture of a business allows the management team to then identify how they want their employees to behave. What this means to your business. This means that your business for issue 8 had to define what culture it wanted. It then had to establish if the employees within your business felt it was achieving the defined culture. And where there was a difference between what it wanted to achieve and what the employees in the business thought, This would then create an action plan for improvement. What this means now. 3 years on, this means that your business should already have a culture plan in place, and your management team should be reviewing it regularly to keep adding improvement actions. For issue 9, there are a few additions to the requirements. They're only small, but the impact of them is going to be huge, so you need to know what they are, as they'll affect you personally and your department. The changes in culture. The changes in issue 9 for culture are that your business must define how it wants its employees to behave. The senior team must review culture annually. At least one of the senior team must present culture at the audit. And culture is referenced throughout the standard. Let's now look at what that means as a whole and specifically what it means to you in procurement. What the changes mean. The easiest way to understand the changes is to compare how audits typically used to be managed to how they need to be managed in the future. Compliance to the standard and running an audit has always been a technical job. However, what the standard is looking for with these culture changes is for a change in behaviour with regard to compliance. Compliance and the audit should no longer be seen as something that technical looks after, but instead it must now be a team effort. One of the changes was that at least one of the senior team must present culture at the audit. The reason that BRCGS want this to happen is that they want to see that your business is sharing the responsibility of the audit, that the whole of the senior team is accountable for compliance to the standard. In theory, this means that the most senior person on site must present senior management commitment, as this is their area of accountability. The operations lead will need to present their part. Engineering will need to present maintenance, and so on. As a member of the procurement team, you need to be prepared to present your area of accountability, which is supplier management and product defence for the upstream supply chain. This means that you need to understand what's required to comply with the standard for supplier management and product defence, and what the changes are within issue 9 for these. Supplier management. Although there's not massive changes in this section, there's a lot of little changes. We don't have enough time to go through them all, but the interesting ones are that the standard has now clarified that the Product Defence Plan, or VASP, if that's what you call it, must now integrate into your material risk assessment. So the outputs from your VASP system must be an input into your material risk assessment. Monitoring has also been stressed again, so we need to have a much more robust system in place to gather data from our suppliers so that it can be assessed. Service suppliers also now need to be monitored after they've been approved. Finally, the list of service suppliers has been increased again, with consultants now being put back in again. They've also added training providers to the list, which you can imagine I find really interesting. It's interesting because you wouldn't normally have access to the information you need to be able to approve or monitor a training provider. As a business, we're going to create a pack for our customers, which includes a risk assessment, evidence that you can use to approve us, and also data that you can use to monitor us. But that's because we work so closely to the standard, and we're a small enough business to be flexible enough to do that. How companies like Highfill will react to this, I'm not sure. And if you think even further, BRCGS provide their own training, so how would you approve and monitor BRCGS as a training provider? Product Defence. Your Product Defence team, you may call them VASP or TASP team, must now be trained. Vulnerability in the upstream supply chain, or VASP, is the defence of products from fraud, and threats on site and in the downstream supply chain, or TASP, is the defence of products from malicious contamination. It's all defence, which is why we class it as one thing, product defence. Anyhow, your team or teams must now be trained. This makes sense as it's a sensible next step in the topic's development. You have to have a trained HACCP team, so it makes sense that you must have a trained product defence team. What this means to you. As a member of the procurement team, or the procurement lead for your business, it's now up to you and your team to champion supplier management and product defence of your upstream supply chain. This means that you should be accountable for the procedure that controls supplier management and be responsible for its implementation. Supplier management and product defence. For issue 9, these two topics go hand in hand, as product defence should feed into supplier management. You must train your product defence team, and you need to take a really good look at how you monitor your suppliers. And don't forget, if you use consultants or training providers, you must now approve these too. We'll be contacting all of our customers in November to ensure that they've got everything they need from us ready for their next audit. Your next steps. Picking up the baton for supplier management and product defence and running with it is probably a bit of a daunting task if you've not been accountable for it before. To enable you to do this and be able to present it confidently at audit, you're going to need to understand the requirements of the standard for these subjects in detail. To do this, we would recommend that you complete our Issue 9 for Procurement training course. This will take you through the changes to the standard and how to implement them. The training is actionable, so you'll know exactly what you need to do. That way, when it comes to your audit, you'll be able to explain to the auditor the changes to the standard that impact your department and what you've done about them. That's the end of the presentation, so we'll now move on to questions.
So Rory Blair has asked Cassie what sort of information we'll need to keep on file for suppliers of service suppliers.
Okay, so service suppliers in general, there's a few things that you need to do. So first of all, you need to do a risk assessment for each one to determine what risks they pose to your business. So they're going to be doing specific things for you on your behalf. For example, if you are using a logistics contractor for vehicles and delivery, so they're going to be doing that particular aspect of your operation for you. So you need to do a risk assessment for that part of the operation to look at what risks they pose. And that then needs to develop into what controls you require them to put in place. So that will create the controls that you need, and that's then what you should assess those suppliers against. So if it was a logistics supplier, you'd be looking at the type of certification that they've got to see if they've got all of those controls in place. So you would be looking at in terms of evidence, you want your risk assessment to start with. You want to provide evidence as to how you've come up with the controls that you've defined, and then you want evidence of those controls, either through certification, supplier audit, or another method if you're using SAQs. Service suppliers are slightly different from material suppliers in that you can't always provide certification. So a transport company is quite an easy one because you would perhaps be able to get storage and distribution certificate, but for things like pest management, training providers like we've talked about, laundry providers, they would need a different type of assessment. So that's where your risk assessment comes in. You think about what risks they pose to your business, and then you work out what controls you need to be able to mitigate those risks. And then you look for evidence from that supplier that they have those controls in place. I hope that helps.
The next question was, can this risk assessment be done as per material type? I know you were talking about service suppliers there, but I think this has switched over to material suppliers.
Can the risk assessment be done by material type? Okay, yes. As long as all of those materials within that group of materials all have the same risks. So if you were going to have a group of dairy, and within that you had unpasteurised raw milk and pasteurised milk as an extreme example, then that wouldn't be acceptable to risk assess them all as one group, because raw and pasteurised milk has different risks. So you can group them to make it easier, but you just need to make sure that you're going to risk assess the apparent risks for those particular materials.
Okay, Donna Robinson would like to know if anything has changed for raw material suppliers. They currently get theirs approved by their technical team.
Has anything changed for raw material suppliers as a whole, just generally? The only thing that's changed in terms of raw materials is that they've called out the fact that you need to, if you're purchasing meat, then you need to risk assess prohibited substances within the meat. But to be honest, I don't really understand why they've called it out, because that would need to be assessed as part of your risk assessment. It's one of your safety or legality requirements. So nothing specific, no, and there's not anything specific that's changed in terms of how you assess them either. You can still use your GFSI certificate, your third-party certificate, or a audit or an SAQ if they are low risk. They've defined a little bit more about outsourced products. So if you're doing a material risk assessment for them, then you need to make sure that your risk assessment is resulting in a not low risk supplier when it looks at outsourced products.
I think that's it for now, Cassie.
No. Okay. Just that question on to Donna about the normally the technical team approve them. Just bear in mind that you do need to work with technical. The link between you needs to be much more apparent now, given the changes in culture. So although it could be a technical job to do that, you do need to be accountable for those materials as well. So just be careful that it's not just technical, that you do get involved in that process.
Oh,
Okay.
we've got a new question quickly. The culture
Okay.
presentation needs to be done by procurement rep. Not quite in understanding that question. Does the culture presentation need to be done by procurement, I think?
Yeah. Okay. So it needs to be one of the senior team. So if you're a member of the senior team and you end up being the only senior manager on site on the day of the audit, if it's an unannounced one, for example, then it will be you that would need to be able to present that information. So yes and no, it depends on the situation. But from a cultural perspective, you do need to make sure that you understand the culture plan, because the auditor may pick on someone else, even though the person that's presenting it is doing it. They might want to make sure that everybody else does understand the culture plan as well. All right, thank you very much. Take care. Bye.
Bye.